In a town once filled with calm and routine, a brutal murder shatters the peace and leaves everyone in shock. What seems like a simple crime at first begins to unravel a much darker story as the investigation delves deeper. A powerful figure, once respected by all, hides a dangerous obsession that takes a devastating turn. Relationships built on trust and admiration crumble, and a tangled web of manipulation, jealousy, and betrayal comes to light. As detectives uncover more secrets, the line between victim and perpetrator grows ever more blurred. What led to this tragic crime, and who is truly responsible? Join us as we peel back the layers of a twisted tale that will leave you questioning everything. Welcome to Silent Crime Case. The peaceful town of Caldwell, nestled in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, was shaken to its core when Judge Samuel Harris was found murdered in a remote area outside the town. Known for his integrity and unwavering sense of justice, the judge had been a respected figure in the local community. His death, especially for someone of his stature, left everyone stunned and searching for answers. The murder was a brutal one, executed with precision, and the town was left wondering how such a beloved figure could meet such a violent end. The investigation began quickly, but no one could have anticipated the shocking discoveries that would unfold. At first, the case seemed simple, with little to go on other than a dead body, and the initial suspicion that the crime might have been a robbery gone wrong. But as the detectives dug deeper into Harris's life, a far darker and more complex story began to emerge. Judge Harris had a secret, one that he had worked hard to keep hidden from the public eye. His obsession with Mira West, the 23-year-old daughter of Sheriff George West, had consumed him. Initially, their interactions were innocent enough, with occasional conversations at local events. But as time passed, what seemed like harmless flirtation soon turned into an unhealthy, dangerous obsession. Mira, a bright and artistic young woman, found herself caught in this whirlwind of attention and control. What was not known at the time of his murder, however, was the personal turmoil that had plagued Harris for years. Divorced and living alone in an empty house, he battled loneliness that severely eroded his confidence. His children, now adults, had long since moved away, and his work, once a source of pride, had become a burden. As he dealt with these internal struggles, the affair with Mira provided a temporary escape. His obsession with her would soon spiral out of control, leading to a shocking and deadly confrontation. Mira West had always been an independent soul. Raised in a town that seemed to stifle her ambitions, she dreamed of a life filled with creativity and exploration. Working at a local art gallery, she found solace in the world of design, though her life seemed to be anchored by the weight of expectations. Her father, Sheriff George West, was a man of tradition and discipline, and while he loved her deeply, he often imposed strict limits on the path she could take. Mira longed for freedom, something that she felt was slipping away in Caldwell. When Mira first met Judge Samuel Harris, their interaction seemed innocuous. At a charity event organized by the Caldwell Art Society, the two exchanged pleasantries about art and local culture. But what neither of them could have predicted was the undeniable connection that sparked between them. Despite the 30-year age gap between them, Mira found herself captivated by Harris's power, authority, and the subtle charm he exuded. As Harris began visiting the gallery more often, Mira found herself torn between the excitement of the attention and the underlying unease she felt about the situation. Harris's gifts, expensive jewelry, and rare art pieces seemed to give her the freedom she craved, but at a great cost. She couldn't ignore the emotional control he exerted over her, and as his obsession grew, so did her internal conflict. Should she walk away from this dangerous path, or would she remain caught in his orbit? This emotional push and pull played a significant role in how Mira viewed her own identity. The affair with Harris gave her a glimpse of a life filled with excitement and escape from the monotony she felt trapped in. But she also knew it was leading her down a road she might not be able to turn back from. This internal struggle between her desires and her morals only intensified as time passed. As their secret relationship deepened, so too did the darkness that surrounded it. What had begun as an exciting escape for Mira quickly became a suffocating trap. Harris's jealousy, once subtle, grew more overt. He began showing up unannounced at Mira's apartment, demanding her attention when she had other plans. He would call her at all hours of the night, pressuring her to stay in contact and accusing her of seeing other men. The once charismatic and charming judge had turned into an emotional tyrant, and Mira found herself in the midst of a toxic and controlling relationship. She had tried to keep her romantic life separate from her affair with Harris, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Eli Turner, a local artist and friend, had entered Mira's life at a time when she felt the need for a break from the emotional turmoil of her relationship with Harris. Eli was everything Harris was not: calm, easygoing, and understanding. Their connection was innocent, but as it grew, so did Harris's jealousy. When Harris discovered Mira's growing attraction to Eli, his rage knew no bounds. His possessiveness escalated, and he began making threats. Mira, now trapped in a cycle of fear and manipulation, knew that her secret relationship with Harris was becoming more dangerous by the day. The sense of control he exerted over her was beginning to weigh heavily on her. Meanwhile, Sheriff George West, Mira's father, had begun to sense that something was wrong. He noticed the subtle changes in Mira's behavior, her avoidance of certain conversations, her growing distance, and he began to investigate. When he saw Harris's car parked outside Mira's apartment one night, his suspicions were confirmed. George, though hesitant, began gathering information on Harris, soon realizing that his daughter's relationship with the judge was far darker than he had initially imagined. Sheriff George West, though a man of law and order, was deeply troubled by the changes in his daughter's behavior. He had always prided himself on his instincts, and they told him something was wrong with Mira. She had always been open with him about her life, but recently she had become distant. She would disappear for hours, her whereabouts unknown, and when she returned there was an unmistakable unease in her behavior. As a man who had worked in law enforcement for years, George had seen his share of troubled young people runaways, troubled relationships, and abusive situations. But this was his daughter, and his protective instincts kicked in. When he saw Judge Harris's car parked outside Mira's apartment one night, his suspicions were confirmed. Something was going on, and he wasn't about to ignore it. The sheriff began his investigation, reviewing Harris's phone records and tracking his movements in the town. What he uncovered was a growing web of troubling signs. Harris had been spending an unusual amount of time in areas not related to his judicial duties, and many of these places were near locations where Mira frequently visited. George was deeply disturbed by what he was finding, but he knew he had to tread carefully. Confronting Harris without solid proof would only escalate the situation, and he had no intention of causing a scandal without concrete evidence. As he dug deeper, George realized that Harris's obsession with Mira was not a simple infatuation. It was becoming an unhealthy fixation. The closer George came to the truth, the more he understood that Mira was in grave danger. But he was still unsure of how to protect her from the man who had once been a trusted colleague. The night Sheriff George West was found dead marked a chilling turning point in the investigation. His body was discovered in a remote area shot at close range, sending shockwaves through the town. The death of such a respected figure in the community left everyone stunned, and the search for answers intensified. It wasn't long before all eyes turned to Judge Harris as the prime suspect. The detectives quickly uncovered key pieces of evidence that pointed to Harris's involvement. His emotional volatility, his obsession with Mira, and his increasingly erratic behavior all became factors in building the case against him. However, they still lacked concrete proof to arrest him. Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, the detectives knew they needed something more. Something that would definitively link Harris to the sheriff's murder. As they pieced together the timeline of events, they discovered that Harris had made large, unexplained withdrawals from his bank account in the days leading up to the murder. This led them to suspect that Harris had hired someone to kill George West, removing the man who stood between him and Mira. Yet there was no direct evidence to confirm this theory. The case was becoming more complex with each new piece of information. The detectives continued to push forward, gathering evidence and speaking to witnesses. But the pressure was mounting, and it was clear that time was running out. The truth was waiting to be uncovered. But with each passing day, the stakes grew higher. Harris, once a respected figure, now stood at the center of a tragic and twisted murder investigation, and the entire town awaited the shocking conclusion. With Sheriff George West's tragic death, the investigation into his murder took on a new urgency. The small town of Caldwell, which had once been a place of peace, was now in turmoil. As the town reeled from the shock, law enforcement poured all their resources into the case. The spotlight shifted to Judge Gavin Harris, whose connection to both the sheriff and his daughter Mira made him the prime suspect. Though circumstantial evidence was mounting, the detectives knew they needed hard proof to arrest him. Detective Laura Jenkins, who had been assigned to the case, was determined to find the truth. Her team combed through Harris's personal and professional life, uncovering more and more troubling evidence. It wasn't just his strange behavior that raised alarms, it was his increasingly erratic actions. Harris's jealousy over Mira, his possessiveness, and the lengths he had gone to control her, all pointed to a man whose obsession had become dangerous. The investigators were particularly focused on the timeline leading up to George West's murder. They learned that Harris had made significant financial transactions in the days before the crime, which could indicate premeditation. Yet, there was still no direct link between Harris and the crime itself. Detective Jenkins, though cautious, was convinced that Gavin had played a pivotal role in George's death. Still, they lacked the key piece of evidence that could break the case wide open. The pressure mounted as the community demanded answers, and the detectives knew they had to act fast. With each passing day, the evidence grew stronger, but they needed something irrefutable to bring the case to a close. The trail was growing colder, and the detectives needed to keep pushing for answers no matter the cost. Detective Laura Jenkins's persistence paid off when a breakthrough came in the form of a security camera footage review. A grainy image from a gas station near the crime scene showed Judge Harris's car passing through the area on the night Sheriff George West was killed. This discovery, though not definitive proof, placed Harris near the scene at the right time. It confirmed what the investigators had long suspected, that Harris was somehow involved. While the footage provided crucial evidence, the investigation continued to be a tangled web of deception. The detectives knew they needed more than circumstantial evidence. They needed a confession or concrete proof that could tie Harris directly to the murder. But as Jenkins pressed Harris harder during interviews, he remained calm and steadfast in his denials, claiming that he had been at home the night George West was killed. However, the pressure was beginning to crack his facade. The media had already started to sensationalize the case, with reporters flocking to Caldwell. The story of the respected judge and the sheriff's daughter had become a local scandal, and the town was abuzz with rumors. Jenkins knew that the case was drawing public attention, but the pressure to solve it was mounting. Every day, new details emerged, but they were still missing the smoking gun. The detectives knew that they were closing in, but the real challenge was extracting the truth from a man who believed he could hide it all. The breakthrough that the detectives had been hoping for came unexpectedly during a routine review of phone records. They discovered a series of text messages between Judge Harris and Mira that had been deleted from his phone. Though the messages were no longer accessible on his device, the detectives managed to recover them through a forensic investigation. The messages revealed an unsettling pattern of Harris's increasingly obsessive behavior, including threats made towards Mira's father. One of the messages stood out above the rest. Harris had hinted that Mira's father, Sheriff George West, needed to be removed for them to be together freely. The chilling revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. It was clear now that Harris's obsession with Mira had crossed a dangerous line, and the murder of her father was not an impulsive act, but a calculated and premeditated one. The detectives now had the evidence they needed to move forward. The text messages from Harris revealed his twisted mindset, and they began to piece together the details of the murder. They discovered that Harris had been planning the murder for weeks, making arrangements to meet with the sheriff under the guise of a friendly conversation. In truth, it was a trap. Harris had lured the sheriff to a remote location, where he ultimately killed him in cold blood. The discovery of these messages was the turning point the detectives had been waiting for. It provided the direct evidence they needed to prove that Harris was not only responsible for the murder of Sheriff West, but that he had been planning it all along. The investigation was no longer a matter of suspicion. It was now a matter of uncovering the full extent of Harris's obsession and the twisted logic behind his actions. With the new evidence in hand, the detectives were ready to confront Judge Gavin Harris directly. They had obtained a search warrant for his home, and during the search, they uncovered more evidence that sealed his fate. A handgun, registered in his name, was found in a locked drawer, recently cleaned but still showing traces of gunpowder residue. This was the weapon used to kill Sheriff George West, and it provided the final piece of the puzzle. Detective Jenkins, knowing they were closing in on Harris, arranged for a formal interrogation. When Harris was brought into the interrogation room, he appeared calm and composed, as if confident that he could talk his way out of the charges. But Detective Jenkins was prepared. She methodically laid out the evidence against him: his suspicious financial transactions, the deleted text messages, the footage placing his car at the crime scene, and the gun that was found in his possession. As she presented each piece of evidence, Harris's composure began to crack. He grew visibly uncomfortable, his once confident demeanor replaced by a look of unease. It was clear that the walls were closing in on him, and the truth was becoming inescapable. But still he refused to confess. He maintained his innocence, insisting that he had no part in the sheriff's death. Finally, Detective Jenkins dropped the bombshell. Mira had confessed everything. She had admitted that Harris had repeatedly told her that if her father were out of the way, they could be together openly. The mention of Mira's name shattered Harris's calm facade. His eyes widened, and for the first time, he realized that there was no way out. He was cornered. With no further options, Harris finally broke down and confessed. His obsession with Mira had driven him to commit murder, and he had planned the death of Sheriff George West with cold precision. The confession was the culmination of months of investigation, and it was the moment the detectives had been working towards since the beginning. In the months that followed Harris's confession, the trial began, and the courtroom was filled with spectators eager to witness the dramatic unfolding of the case. The trial was one of the most sensational events in Caldwell's recent history, as the details of Judge Harris's obsession and the murder of Sheriff George West captivated the public. The media coverage was intense, and every moment of the trial was scrutinized by the local community. Harris's defense team attempted to argue that he had acted in a temporary state of madness, driven to the brink by his emotions and obsession. They claimed that he had lost control in a moment of passion, unable to cope with the rejection he felt from Mira. However, the prosecution presented a compelling case, showing that the murder was carefully planned and executed with premeditation. The evidence of his obsession, including the text messages and his purchase of the handgun, painted a portrait of a man who had allowed his desire to overwhelm his morality. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that the jury was not convinced by the defense's arguments. The cold, calculated nature of the crime left no room for doubt in the minds of the jurors. The prosecution's case was strong, and Judge Harris's fate seemed sealed. The trial had become a public spectacle, with many wondering how someone so respected in the community could fall so far, driven by the darkest parts of human nature. As the trial neared its end, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Judge Gavin Harris had been sitting in the defendant's chair for months, his fate hanging in the balance. The prosecution had built a strong case, with overwhelming evidence of premeditation and obsession. The defense, though attempting to frame Harris's actions as a moment of temporary madness, had struggled to provide any credible counter-arguments. The prosecution's meticulous presentation of text messages, financial records, and video footage had left little room for doubt. In the final moments of the trial, the jury deliberated in silence. The weight of the evidence against Harris was clear, and the public eagerly awaited the verdict. Families, friends, and townspeople filled the courtroom, their emotions running high. Mira, who had been called as a key witness, sat quietly in the gallery, the gravity of the situation weighing on her. She had already lost so much: her father, her sense of safety, and her future. And now, the man who had manipulated and controlled her for so long would finally face justice. The jury returned after hours of deliberation, and the silence in the courtroom was deafening. The foreman stood, and with a steady voice, read the verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The room erupted into whispers and murmurs as Harris's face remained expressionless. His conviction was a result of his calculated actions, and now, he would face the consequences. Judge Gavin Harris, once a figure of power and respect, was now a convicted murderer, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Mira, the verdict was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but the emotional scars would remain forever. She knew that her life would never be the same, but at least now, she could begin the process of healing. The verdict had been delivered, and while the town of Caldwell began to recover from the shock of the trial, the emotional toll on those involved was far from over. For Mira, the trial had been a painful and exhausting journey. The memories of her secret relationship with Judge Harris, the manipulation, and the eventual betrayal had been brought into the public eye. Her father's death, which had been the catalyst for this entire ordeal, still weighed heavily on her heart. Though Harris was behind bars, the scars of his obsession with Mira would never fully heal. The trauma she had experienced, both physically and emotionally, was a constant reminder of the dark path she had been forced to walk. Mira left Caldwell shortly after the trial, seeking refuge in a city where no one knew her past. She hoped to rebuild her life, to regain a sense of normalcy, but she knew that the trauma of the events would always be a part of her. The town, too, was left to pick up the pieces. Judge Harris, once a figure of authority, had become a symbol of the dangers of unchecked obsession. The memory of his crime would linger in Caldwell for years to come. The courthouse, where Harris had once presided with dignity, now stood as a reminder of how a man's power could be twisted by his own desires. For the residents of Caldwell, the case became a cautionary tale, one that parents would tell their children to remind them of the dangers of obsession and manipulation. After the trial, Mira found herself at a crossroads. She had lived through a nightmare and had come out the other side, scarred but still standing. The life she had once dreamed of seemed so far away, and the city she had hoped would offer her a fresh start felt like an alien place. Mira had always been drawn to art, and it was art that ultimately gave her the strength to begin again. In her new city, she found solace in her art. She enrolled in an art school, hoping to reconnect with the passion that had once driven her. Memories of her past haunted her. The faces of her father and Judge Harris would never be far from her mind, but as she picked up a paintbrush once more, she found a sense of peace that had long eluded her. Eli, the artist who had been her support during the darkest times, remained a constant presence in her life. Though their romantic relationship had faded, their friendship remained strong. He understood her need for distance and space, and he respected her decision to find a new path. Mira appreciated his unwavering support, and though they had both moved on, their bond was unbreakable. In time, Mira learned to accept that her past would always be a part of her, but it did not define her future. She had survived, and now she was ready to live. Though Judge Gavin Harris had been convicted and sentenced to life in prison, the impact of his crime extended far beyond the courtroom. His actions had left a deep scar in the town of Caldwell, and the legacy of his obsession would never be forgotten. For Mira, the trauma she had endured at his hands would haunt her for the rest of her life. As the years passed, the story of Judge Harris and Sheriff George West became a part of Caldwell's history. The once proud courthouse, where Harris had presided with authority, now stood as a symbol of the dangers of unchecked power. The case became a local legend, a tale of obsession gone wrong that parents would tell their children to warn them of the dark side of human nature. For Mira, the town's memory of the case was a constant reminder of the price she had paid for freedom. Though she had found a new life, the whispers of the past would always follow her. The trial had given her justice, but it had also exposed her darkest secrets. She had been a victim, but she had also been a key part of the story that had unfolded. The town would never forget her, just as she would never forget the town. The story of Judge Gavin Harris and his twisted obsession with Mira West was a cautionary tale that would be passed down for generations. It was a reminder that even the most respected figures could fall prey to their own desires, and that obsession, when left unchecked, could lead to tragedy. As time went on, Mira's life slowly began to heal. The memories of her father's death, the manipulation of Judge Harris, and the subsequent trial became more distant, though they would never truly fade. Mira, now an accomplished artist, had found her voice through her work. Her art became a form of therapy, a way to process the trauma she had experienced and to express the pain she had hidden for so long. Though the scars of the past remained, Mira had come to understand that healing was a journey, not a destination. Her past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her future. She had built a new life, one where her art and her independence took center stage. Eli, though no longer a romantic partner, remained a close friend and confidant. The bond they shared, forged during the darkest moments of her life, was something that would never fade. The case of Judge Gavin Harris had left a lasting impact on Caldwell, but it had also left a mark on Mira that she would carry with her forever. As the years went by, the town slowly moved on, but for those who remembered the case, the story of obsession, manipulation, and murder would never be forgotten. For Mira, it had been a reminder that even in the darkest moments there was always the possibility of finding light, and though the shadows of her past would always be with her, she had learned to live beyond them. As the truth finally comes to light, the consequences of obsession and betrayal are laid bare for all to see. Lives are shattered, and the echoes of this tragic crime will linger long after the trial is over. The story serves as a stark reminder of how dangerous unchecked desire can be, and how the darkest secrets often remain hidden until it's too late. But the real question remains, could this tragedy have been avoided? What do you think? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping true crime cases. Thanks for watching, and remember to stay vigilant because silence can sometimes speak louder than words. This is Silent Crime Case,